Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 299. Hack your past with forgiveness. Hack your present with mindfulness. And hack your future with I Am Enough. Vishen Lakhiani.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Black Box. Black Box is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Black Box, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Black Box currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Black Box is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Black Box, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Black Box takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. If you want access to filmmaking documentaries, feature films about filmmaking, interviews with some of the top screenwriters and filmmakers in Hollywood, as well as educational online courses all in one place, IFH TV is for you. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv. Well, guys, we are almost there. We're almost at episode 300. We are on episode 299 today, and I have an amazing special guest today, Michael Goi, who is a legendary cinematographer as well as a director, and he is the visionary behind the look of American Horror Story. We go into the weeds on how he works, what his process is, how he shoots film, why they chose to shoot film on that show. It is easily the most stylistic, beautifully shot show on TV without question. It is stunning and in many ways revolutionary in the way that he and Ryan Murphy, the creator, came together to create this. It's again insanity. It's chaos, but it looks amazing. And we get into a lot of the details of how he is able to create such unique and vibrant looks for the show. Michael's a member of the ASC and a former 3-time president of the American Cinematographers Society, which is a big deal. He also rewrote the manual, literally helped to rewrite the American Cinematography Manual. So Michael is definitely a guy who knows his stuff. And I also want to give a big shout out to Austin Nordell, my buddy who set this entire interview up. Thank you, Austin, for making the connection. I truly, truly appreciate it. We also get into his 18,000 plus film collection that he has in his garage. And if you guys want to see the video version of this podcast, please go to the show notes and I will have a link to that episode. And in that episode, he actually records it in his screening suite that he has with all his movies in the background. It is insane to see. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Michael Goi. I'd like to welcome to the show Michael Goi. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to the tribe today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. So before we get into it, how did you get in the film business in the first place?
Well, I was always shooting, even as a kid. I mean, I was classically the kid who begged his parents for a used 8mm movie camera, and I would make 8mm and Super 8 films in the backyard with my friends. And by the time I got to my first year of high school, when I was 14, I wanted to make professional movies. So I saved up enough to get a used 16mm Bolex camera. And the film stock was so much more expensive than Super 8 film that I searched out mostly Mexican companies to shoot commercials for on spec on the weekends with my friends. So, I had several television commercials on the air in Spanish television before I graduated from high school. And I just never stopped.
That's pretty impressive back then to be able to do that. How were you editing all that, or were you editing it?
No, I wasn't editing it. The owners of the companies would put it through post production through the people that they knew.
And then how did you start from commercials in the Mexican market to where you are today? How did you kind of start, going up the ladder?
Well, I went to study filmmaking at Columbia College in Chicago, and they had a very hands-on film program. And what I liked about Columbia was they basically set you up to fail. It was really great because they would send you out with 100 feet of film and a camera and tell you to do a dozen shots of a subject that meant something to you, knowing full well that you would probably fail in some huge way. But what it did was that it completely eliminated the fear of failure. So as I went through college and then into my professional life, I always had this point of view that I will try anything, that nothing is off bounds. And if I felt too comfortable with something or too sure of myself in terms of how to accomplish something, that was the indication to me that I was not taking enough chances and I wasn't pushing and stretching myself as an artist.
Now, during your early career, you did a lot of feature film work and TV movies and things like that. And I noticed on your credits that there were a lot of horror stuff. Is that a genre that you really feel attached to?
I mean, I do like horror films and science fiction films in general. I have a special affinity for the horror films of the 1940s, like the Val Lewton movies or the sci-fi movies of the 1950s. But horror has always been an effective vehicle for new filmmakers entering into the business because you didn't require actors who got paid millions and millions of dollars. The concept was basically the strength of the movie. And so a lot of the low budget filmmakers, the young people who are trying to start out, gravitated toward horror. And that's been true pretty much since the beginning of filmmaking. But I have a lot of movies on my resume of that type and other types. I mean, I've probably shot more movies that nobody has ever seen than most people. I think there's 50 or 60 feature films on my resume that nobody has ever seen. But, I found that the more I shot, the more I learned and the more contacts you made, because this industry is all about making connections and getting to know everybody else in the business.
Now, when you were coming up, I'm assuming you didn't just, come out of school and then boom, right, and started doing feature film work. Did you work your way up like traditionally through an apprenticeship or through camera, being a camera assistant, loader, all that kind of stuff?
Well, toward the tail end of my college education, I was actually filming feature-length documentaries for PBS at the time. So I was doing a good amount of documentary work and then operating and then DPing on commercials. But I was more drawn to the lighting side of the industry. I worked as an electrician and ultimately as a gaffer. I was less drawn to the mechanics of the camera. I was a terrible first assistant camera person. I wouldn't hire me. My interest wasn't in whether or not the shot was in focus. It was what was the lighting doing on the face of the actor at the time I was shooting. So I gravitated more toward the lighting side and then worked a good amount, in that field. Prominently, I think, for Jeff Jur, who's a very good friend and somebody who was a couple of years ahead of me at Columbia College. And Jeff was the cinematographer that I always envisioned that I wanted to be. He had a quiet control of the set. He knew exactly what he wanted, and yet he was very open and giving about people's input into the project. And I remember when I asked Jeff if he wanted me to rough in something for the next setup, and we were working on an industrial shoot, and I said, "Where do you want the lights?" And Jeff said, "Well, you know what looks good. Why don't you just go ahead and do what you feel like needs to be done?" And it was that kind of spirit of, go out there and show me your best stuff that really stuck with me. And when I was pounding on the door of Hollywood for 10 years to try to get into television shooting. Nobody would hire me, despite the fact that I think I had like 40 features under my belt at that time. I still couldn't get hired on a television show. Jeff is the one who opened that door, and when he was doing a big show for ABC called Invasion, he needed somebody to shoot additional units, of large scenes, and he insisted to the producers that they bring me in to shoot those. And the producers were a little hesitant initially because they were like, well, he doesn't have any credits for television. So they decided to go ahead and give me one night, 5 scenes to shoot. And Jeff kept insisting to them that I knew exactly the style of the show. And when I went there that night to shoot, I asked Jeff, what is the style of the show? Because I have no idea what the style of the show is. And Jeff said, well, you have a script and, you know what feels good to you. Just do what you feel like you should be doing. So it was exactly the same thing he told me like 20 years earlier. And so I did that. I lit those scenes the way I felt like they needed to be shot. And the next day they all watched the rushes, and Jeff told the producers, see, Michael knows exactly the style of this show. And they hired me for the rest of the season.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, it was the jumping off point for me in television, certainly.
Now, that's a really great thing I love to kind of touch on a little bit, because so many up and coming filmmakers, screenwriters, and also obviously cinematographers, they don't realize that this is not a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan. You just said that you were pounding on the doors for 10 years before someone gave you a shot, and you were working, but not where you wanted to be. You wanted to kind of break into television, but yet you had 40 features behind you, and yet nobody was giving you an opportunity, but yet you were still persevering, and you persevered and persevered till someone finally gave you that. Can you kind of just kind of really explain to the audience how important is patience and perseverance in this business?
Well, in persistence, I mean, it's the A-level person who is the most artistic oftentimes is not the person who makes it in this business. Mm-hmm. It's the B-level person who will do absolutely anything to get a job, to get on set, to do the best job they can on sometimes questionable material. I never made a judgment about the things that I was working on. I was thrilled to be working. I was thrilled to be meeting other crew people. And I would bring whatever artistry that I could to the project at hand. And it's sort of the same now. I mean, people ask me, did you choose this movie or did you choose this television show because you get to do artistically this? Well, the artistry really, frankly, comes after you do choose the job, and then you find the artist. I think, the bottom line for me is that this is my job. This is the thing that I've chosen to do with my life and my career, the thing that will make me money so I can pay my mortgage and put my kids through college. Mm-hmm. And I do not have the luxury of not getting up and not going to work in the morning. So I will find the best opportunities that I can within the opportunities that are, presented to me.
You seem to have walked into this business, and I'm sure it took time to do, but without ego. Because if you show up, like you said, I don't make any judgments at the work I was doing early in my career because I was just happy to be working. Do you find that there's so many people coming into the business now that are full of those egos that the business will take care of by themselves? I'm not saying everybody, but I've noticed that myself in my business.
Well, I think, everybody is different. But the thing is, if you're the star in college in the filmmaking class, doesn't mean that you're going to be the star in the actual industry. Mm-hmm. Tommy Lee Jones, I think famously and accurately, when he was asked, why did you do so many crappy movies in the 1970s, so many exploitation films. And Tommy said, I was never a truck driver and I was never a waiter. I was always an actor. And if I was offered 3 crappy movies, I would do the least crappy of the 3, but I was always doing my craft. And I kind of felt strongly the same way. I've shot a lot of things that I probably would never watch, but I would find something in those projects that would be exciting to me, or something that I could push the limits on and see what I could make out of it. And it's ultimately, you have to make connections with people, and the best way to make connections is to actually be on the set, because that grip that's working on that $100,000 low budget movie with you today, tomorrow is going to go to some $50 million movie and work as a grip over there. And, you want those people to go out and say, hey, I just worked with this tremendous cinematographer on this no budget movie. And that's what gets around. And attitude is everything. You bring your best attitude to the work, you minimize your ego, and you do what's needed of you to be done.
It is a very small business, isn't it?
It is. It's a small industry.
I mean, so many people, it's amazing, people I've run into that have known this person or that person. And people don't realize that if you do something wrong, or you don't bring that great attitude, it will follow you. So try not to be, try to be as kind as you can while you're working.
Yeah. And it's, a bad incident, or one bad reputation incident will follow you around for quite a long time, but it takes a great deal of time to build up a good reputation. Without question.
Now, let's talk a little bit about American Horror Story, which is a revolutionary looking show that you had a very big part in creating the look for it. How did you get involved with American Horror Story? And then how did you guys sit down with the creators? How did you sit down with the creators to kind of come up with this insane, wonderful look?
Well, I was alternating on Glee for Ryan Murphy at the time, and Horror Story was going to make a shift because their director of photography in season 1 was going off to do something else. This was about mid-season, and they asked me to step off of Glee and step into American Horror Story. And it was a difficult show, a large show, big actors, and it was fun from the standpoint that I've always been the kind of person who likes to be tossed in the center of the hurricane and then find some way to fight myself out. In seasons 3 and 4 of American Horror Story, when we were shooting in New Orleans, the nickname the crew gave me in New Orleans was the Doctor. And a newspaper reporter who was interviewing me asked me, why do they call you the Doctor? And I said, because I'm the guy who fixes things in their perception. So, I like trying to bring order and the reason out of chaotic situations. And, Horror Story had just a bigness about it that I liked. And it was always trying to push the envelope artistically. And that's the thing that I really am indebted to Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk about, is they gave me a tremendous amount of freedom. In any normal situation with a studio or a network, anything you want to do that deviates from the norm, you have to pass through a number of channels to get approval of. In the case of American Horror Story, I just had to text Ryan Murphy and say, I'm thinking about shooting this scene tomorrow on black and white reversal 16 millimeter film. And he texts back, great, sounds great, and that was it. So that show, I got to exercise my imagination and my creativity in ways that I was not able to do on a lot of other shows previous to that.
And you basically had a very big toolbox and a lot of toys to play with on that show to experiment, basically, because there's a lot of experimenting in that show.
It's a lot of experimenting, but the toolbox for me is actually fairly simple. I mean, everything I did on American Horror Story was based on silent movies, stuff that was done prior to 1929. I felt like an integral part of the show had to be just the organic nature of what it is that people are seeing, and out of that sprang out all of this this creativity and these different approaches to flashbacks and to psychotic episodes and to murder scenes and stuff like that. But if I look over the years that I worked on the show as a cinematographer and as a director, I mean, the biggest influence was silent cinema. I could probably name all those movies that influenced me. And
you made the decision to stay with film as opposed to trying to jump to a digital format on that show.
Well, it was sort of like a mutual understanding, I think, between Ryan Murphy, and between Fox. And I have to give a lot of credit to Fox at that time, because the big sweep was going on to make most of television digital, and they had a conversation with me and asked me what did I think about American Horror Story, should it be digital or film, and I felt like film was an important part of the aesthetic of the show, that the different ways we could manipulate film made it special in the eyes of the audience. And I told that to the Fox executives, and they said, okay, sounds good. And they stuck with that all the years that I was shooting the show. So, I give them credit.
And I mean, and again, with shooting film is one thing, but you shot, like you just said, black and white, 16mm reversal. You shot Super 8. What format didn't you shoot? What film format didn't you shoot on that show?
I did not get to shoot infrared. I really wanted to shoot infrared. And the other thing I did not get to shoot was sound recording film, that really high contrast film that they use to make optical soundtracks.
Yes.
Yeah, I really wanted to shoot a scene on sound recording film just to see what it would look like. But, we shot pretty much everything else. We color negative, color reversal, 35 millimeters, 16 millimeter, 16 black and white. Yeah, we shot Super 8, and we even shot we shot 1970s Vidicon tube video for the episode I Am Anne Frank Part 2. Part of Anne Frank's previous life, home life, the director Alfonso Gomez-Reyon and I were talking about it should feel almost like a television soap opera, and then we decided, well, why don't we make it look like a television soap opera? And so I located these 3 old 1970s standard def Vidicon tube cameras, and we shot it with all of its artifacts and with all of its low resolution. And it was the perfect match. So, and that was the thing. We were trying to find always the perfect visual match that enhanced the drama and enhanced the audience's feeling of what the character was going through.
What was it like when you showed up on set that day? When the crew sat there and saw 3 1970s video cameras on set, everyone was like, is that for BTS? What is that?
Well, the crew knew it was coming, because when the cameras landed, they were like, holy cow, well, how do we even output a signal from this that we can record? And so there had to be a good deal of splicing and experimenting going on, and post-production was certainly involved too, because when we recorded it, it had all of these kind of like trailing video artifacts scrolling sideways across the screen, and they said, well, this is not going to be usable. I said, this is perfect. It's frankly perfect. And it was a great experiment, and
well,
I love the way it looked.
Let me ask you a question. What did the post guys think when they would get this stuff? Because I mean, seriously, that's not normal. Like, they must go, this must be wrong.
Well, I certainly felt like I was constantly challenging post to accept things that, frankly, in any other normal universe or with any normal people would be unacceptable. But it was all not about just making a flashy image or to create something that was just flashy for its own sake. It was about finding the most effective way to, as I said, plug into the mind of the character and visually depict the world as the character sees it. So, I remember there was the last episode in season 2, Asylum, is called Madness Ends. Almost a quarter of the episode is a 16 millimeter documentary that Alana Winters, Sarah Paulson's character, is making. And Ryan had said to me that he wanted that documentary to look like the Geraldo Rivera documentary on insane asylums from the 1970s. I said, okay. So I went online and I did a lot of research, and I could never find a good copy of that insane asylum documentary. Everything I saw was multi-generational copies that were really pukey looking and excessively grainy and stuff. And then I realized, well, if I can't find anything good looking on this documentary, then probably Ryan couldn't find anything good looking. So what he is seeing is what I've just seen, and that's what he's reacting to. Who he wants that feel. So I shot the whole sequence on 16 by 3 stops, so I used 3 times less light going into the film for exposure. Then I force processed it 3 stops to sort of bring it in balance, but it made the flesh tones and the colors really pukey and the grain humongous. And then I asked the post-production team to take all of that 16 millimeter pukey footage and transfer it to 3/4-inch U-matic video cassettes, which was an industrial video format that nobody had used for like 20 years. But everybody had a U-matic deck hidden in the back of their editing suite somewhere. And they did a test, and they called me and they said, we don't think you're going to like this. It's just way too extreme. And I said, well, show me the test. And they showed it to me, and it was really pukey, extremely low resolution. There were almost no discernible skin tones, and it was just the grimmest, muckiest image possible, and I loved it. I thought it was perfect to run before we commit to this, because and justifiably, I mean, it was a big part of the episode, and they showed it to Ryan, and Ryan said, I love it. It's perfect.
So you kind of talked about a few things. What were a few kind of the experimental things you did on American Horror Story? What was, in your experience, in your opinion, the most experimental thing you're like, I can't believe this got on air? Oh,
well, I mean, it was probably, and it's experimental, but in my mind, theoretically, it seemed like it would work. Ryan had called me before the day before we shot a flashback scene with Jessica Lange in Freak Show, and said he wanted that footage to look somehow like Nazi fetish porn movies from the 1930s. And so when breaking it down, thinking about, okay, what would Nazi fetish porn movies from the 1930s look like? And obviously we're seeing it through today's, lens, which means it would be like footage that's been found or heavily damaged or whatever. And I and my camera crew, and Bryce Reed would really led the charge on this. He was my camera assistant. We unspooled 16 millimeter black and white reversal film on the darkroom floor, tossed it around like a salad, sprayed it with water, dried it with a hairdryer, flashed it with a flashlight, and then rolled it back up onto a core, all this in the darkroom. And then we stuck it in a hand crank 16 millimeter camera, and it looked exactly like Nazi fetish porn movies from the 1930s. But that was a simple process of breaking down, okay, there would probably be water damage. There would probably be shrinkage of the emulsion. There would probably be all the flaring of the negative and all these things. And they contributed to that look. And it looked exactly the way in dailies it had ended up on the show. And that's the beauty, I think, for me of shooting film, is you can create an extreme look without having to sit in a digital suite for 4 or 5 hours to create it.
Now, I'm assuming you had to do research for those 1930s German fetish porn films. I'm assuming your Google search history might have been rough that month.
Yeah, my Google search history probably reflects a whole lot of weird things.
Fair enough. Now, so you've lit a lot of television, obviously, and also a lot of features. Can you tell the audience a little bit of the major differences creatively from a cinematographer's point of view?
Well, for me, there's not much difference between shooting a television show and shooting a feature film. But, I would say one of the few differences for me is on a feature, I know I'm never going to go back to that set. I'm never going to have another chance to light that set in a different way and stuff like that. So there's a certain degree of you have to commit to something that's your strongest vision when you're in there at that time, because you're never going to be able to revisit it. As opposed to television, sometimes you'll go back to the same set 3 times in the same episode. But, that carries with it another responsibility for me is, on my work on television, I never felt like the same set, especially if it's in multiple scenes in the same episode, it should always look different every time you're in it. Mm-hmm. It never worked for me that if I flicked this switch, it would become the day look in there. And if I flicked this switch, it would become the night look, because that's completely disregarding the fact that that character in that room feels differently the different times that they're in there. And like I said, I feel like cinematography should reflect the internal feelings of the character and visually depict the world as the character sees it. So we meaning my crew, headed by my gaffer, John McGowan, and my operators and grips, would always be throwing away the first idea and trying to find the second, third, or fourth idea for shooting in a space. And, it's a good exercise and something, that I do every day. If something comes to me as the first idea, it comes very easily, and that's the best indication for me that I shouldn't do it. because it's going to be very conventional, and I probably did it before, and I'm looking to find the things that I haven't done before.
Now, you also are extremely knowledgeable about VR. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and what makes you so excited about VR?
Well, I'm excited about VR for the same reason that a lot of people are excited about the technology. It's very immersive. It enables you to maneuver around within an environment that you otherwise would not have access to. And also, I think it has great storytelling potential. And I know that a lot of cinematographers and a lot of directors were very hesitant about VR when the technology was in its infancy stage, because they were like, well, where are the frames? Where are the boundaries and the borders? Because if you don't have frames, then you're not doing compositions. You're not guiding the audience to what you want them to see. Well, I think you can. I think you can guide the audience to what you want them to see and what's important to the story. It's just you have to approach it in a little different way. And so I think the VR has tremendous potential for a whole number of things, including narrative filmmaking, including traditional narrative filmmaking, including certainly documentaries and sports, for which it's already been widely used, and geographical surveys. But I think storytelling in VR is very exciting. And, we meaning the ASC, the ICG, the International Cinematographers Guild, the Art Directors Guild, the Visual Effects Society, and we're all part of a VR subcommittee to explore the use of virtual reality in traditional narrative storytelling, and where the traditional jobs in narrative storytelling in terms of the crew fall into that technology. So I think it's great potential. Now,
you also just mentioned ASC. Obviously, you're an ASC member, and you also did 2 terms as the president.
3 terms.
3 terms. Excuse me. 3 terms as the president, and you also helped write the latest version of the ASC Manual. Correct?
Right.
What was your additions to that manual? Because I remember getting that manual in film school. Which is very different than the one that's currently being taken around. What was your contribution to it?
Yeah, well, the 10th edition of the manual, the one that I edited, probably has the largest sweeping changes in the manual that have occurred in a great many years. I felt like the technologies had evolved so fast in terms of digital, and there needed to be kind of a comprehensive overview of the technologies and what they actually were and what they were called. And I've always considered myself to be the low-tech voice of high-tech. I don't consider myself to be a high-tech person. And when they asked me to be the editor of the manual, I said, well, I don't know that I'm the right person. And they said, well, you can make the manual whatever you want. And I said, well, if I can make the manual something that even I could understand, then I'll tackle it. So, there's probably more digital information in my version of the manual, I think, than any other version that had come before it. Glossary of terms and just the methodology and how it differs from film. But I also wanted to make sure that the manual kept the foundation of film expression and film technology. And one of them for me was Linwood Dunn's article on the optical printer. Mm-hmm. They asked me, am I keeping the Linwood Dunn article? And I said, yes, absolutely I am, because that is the foundation of motion imaging, whether you're shooting on film or you're shooting on video or digital or whatever format. That article is the foundation of motion imaging, and it's important for it to remain in the manual. So it was that balance between the enormous respect I have for the technologies that formed this industry and the knowledge of the technologies that are evolving and vital now. And it took a while. It took me 5 years to get that book out, because every time I thought I'd finished it, the technology had changed so rapidly that I had to rethink a third of the book. And when I started the manual, digital intermediates were the exception. You really had to fight to get a digital intermediate done. And 5 years later, you have to fight to make a film print. So, it's changed that rapidly. Sometimes for the good and sometimes not. I think sometimes we embrace the changeover in technologies without adequately knowing what the longevity and the non-obsolescence of the technologies we're using are.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also have started to direct a lot more recently. First of all, what do you like about both? I mean, I know you love cinematography. What made you start to go towards directing, and just what made you start going more towards directing? Oh, and also, how do you work with cinematographers? You being a very accomplished cinematographer / director.
Well, directing, because I've always directed to some degree throughout the course of my career, either on commercials or short films or features. Mm-hmm. I wrote and directed a very low budget feature, Megan is Missing, before I worked on American Horror Story. Mm-hmm. And that was a $35,000 movie that we did in 8.5 days with 13 to 16-year-old kids. So
nice.
So it was directing comes easily for me if it's a subject that I'm especially tuned to, and I believe the start of my really professional directing career in narrative episodic. I think I have to attribute to Jessica Lange. Mm-hmm. Because I know she was the one who went to Ryan and Fox and said, why isn't Michael directing the show? Because he understands the show better than anybody, and he understands us better than anybody. And
that's awesome.
That opened the door. And, starting my, my directing career, my legitimate directing career on a show like American Horror Story, where I knew all those actors and we all had tremendous respect for each other. It was a great creative environment and gave me a lot of freedom. And I was still shooting the show, so I was cinematographer of the episodes I was directing as well. But it was a great place to kick off. And then as I branched off into other shows, it was like overnight. The switch was flipped in the industry, and everybody started calling me to direct their shows. And I realized, wow, after 30 something years as a cinematographer, nobody's calling me to shoot anything anymore. But they're all calling for me to direct, which is like rich person's problems.
Right.
But it's, and I know that a great part of that was Ryan. Ryan, told Fox that, Michael is a director. He's not a shooter, he's a director. And, he reinforced that kind of vision to the industry. So And, I've enjoyed working on these various shows. I enjoy working with other cinematographers. They don't tell me if they're nervous shooting for me.
I would imagine they would be.
Well, possibly, but I think once they realize that I'm not going to shoot in any direction of the set that looks bad, and I'm not going to ask to roll when the lighting on the leading lady isn't finished, we get along great, and because we can speak the same language, because I've worked with hundreds of directors and learned as much from the not so good ones as the good ones in terms of the amount of prep you need to do and coming to the set, having done your homework and knowing what the vision is, we just get along really great, and we work very efficiently. So it's all good.
Now,
good time.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question. I love asking cinematographers in today's world, because of all the high resolution with the 4Ks, the 1080, obviously HD and 4K and higher. Sometimes older actors and actresses, they need a little help from you. What advice can you give young cinematographers coming up as far as don't use this light, please? Just throw a little bit of this or this on it. I know it varies from set to set, but just any kind of generalized tips that you can give them. Well,
the idea that HD or 2K or 4K is sharper, than film, and therefore it can make somebody look harsh, I think is a little bit of a misunderstanding, because film, 35 millimeter film, is actually sharper than 4K. It has more pixels, for lack of a better word, of information, of color information, density information, brightness, contrast information than the what do you call it, sensor on a digital camera. But the digital camera has a finite number of pixels that it can use to resolve an image. There's not any more than what is on that particular sensor, whereas film emulsion is infinite. It will infinitely readjust itself into any number of configurations to visually depict the image in the most accurate, organic way. So as a result, a lot of times when you're watching an image on a digital camera and you say, wow, that's really sharp, what you're responding to is the contrast that's built into that image, because it cannot resolve as much detail as the film image can. So it's just going to resolve what it can. And, it can create an artificial, impression of contrast or sharpness, but it doesn't actually have as much detail. So what we actually want is not cameras that are lower in resolution than 4K. We want higher resolution cameras. We want 8K. We want 10K. We want 12K, because that is going to approach more of the organic, natural feeling and the look that you get, that people associate with film. And, the irony is that it will look softer, because it is seeing so much more of the detail, the gradations, the yellow in the red, in the green grass, there'll be the brown and there'll be the yellow and all those other tones in there. Those will be visible, whereas with some, digital formats, it is not.
Now, how important is it to save film as a viable shooting format moving into the future? Because it's been a battle. It has been a battle just to maintain it as an option, and a lot of this new generation coming up. I've shot film. I've shot all formats of film. You've obviously done the same. A lot of these kids and younger generation just don't understand it. They're just like, well, it's slow and it's cumbersome and I can't see it instantly. And there's all these negatives to it. How important is it really for you to keep film alive?
It is vitally important for the history of our society as well as our industry to have film. For this simple reason, there is no such thing as a digital archival medium.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It does not exist. When you think of the history of video, and digital. And you think of the fact that there have been, I think, about 100 different formats since the advent of commercial television in the 1950s, and 95% of them cannot be played anymore because they're obsolete or because the machinery doesn't exist. But you can take a roll of film that's over 100 years old, thread it on a projector, and run it. I mean, that's a big statement right there. And the films that are going to suffer in this wave of people shooting primarily on digital are the independent filmmakers, the student filmmakers, and the documentary filmmakers, because a lot of their movies aren't covered by protection agreements, by storage agreements, but with major studios. Mm-hmm. So it's up to then the filmmakers to migrate their data every year and a half to 2 years to make sure that it doesn't inadvertently get erased. And there was a great video on YouTube a number of years ago with a guy who worked in a data migration facility where he was videotaping himself, and he says, "Now watch what happens." And he started screaming at the machine, and you see all these sensors going off into the red, which means that it was developing digital data errors, which means that data could not be accessed anymore. And that's just from the sound waves of his voice screaming at the machine. So we've advanced a little more since then, but the fact of the matter is that, as I say, anything that can be erased with one push of a button, I don't know that I would call archival. And, you want to make sure that all the effort that you spend to create a movie can be seen by people 50 years from now. And right now, the safest way to ensure that will happen is to transfer it to film. Even if the thing that ends up happening 50 years from now is you transfer it from that film to whatever format is going on at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. But, none of these other formats have any longevity. The obsolescence is really kind of astounding. When you think about how many times you have to update your iPhone or your computer programming software, and, all these things, you leave behind what you've created, within that technology at the time that you capture it in that technology, and it's very fragile. So film is very important.
And can you discuss the importance of finding mentors? Because I'm sure you had many mentors growing up, and a lot of filmmakers there. I've met 19-year-olds who are like, I've shot 6 feature films. I don't need a mentor. I already know everything. How important is that? Please tell everybody.
Yeah. Well, nobody makes it on their own. And it's they're fond of saying, well, a student doesn't know anything until they get out into the real world and then they start to learn stuff. Well, I disagree. I think a student knows everything until they get out into the real world and discover that they know nothing. Because, a huge part of that completion of your education is how the professional industry works. And the best way to find out how the professional industry works is to be guided through it by somebody who's in it, who's gone through the things that you will be going through. And cinematographers especially are very open to mentoring young filmmakers. Mm-hmm. I would say that, almost all of the members of the ASC that I know personally, have taken a deep pride in the people that they help getting into the industry. And it's very nerve-wracking, I think, for the young filmmaker to make that contact, to find people mm-hmm. who are their heroes, who they want to be mentored by. But the fact of the matter is that it's an essential part of what you need to do. And so you need to get over your fear and approach these people and make, a contact with them that leads to a relationship, that leads to you getting access to information you otherwise wouldn't get. So it's huge. Mentorship is huge. And the people that I've mentored over the years, and I've mentored quite a few, mm-hmm. Who are now, rising up to top levels in the industry, which is so gratifying to me. I've always felt that mentoring the next generation is the most important thing that I will ever do, more so than anything I would direct, more so than anything I would ever shoot, because, you're ensuring that, this craft goes on.
Now, I hear you like trains.
I love trains.
Where did your love for trains come from? This is not a cinematography question, but I've heard of the legend of your train set at home. So I'd love for you to talk about it.
Yeah, we grew up not destitute, but without not a lot of money in Chicago, and so there was just not that much for toys, and certainly not extravagant toys. And I always wanted to have my own train that I could ride on. So I used to take chalk from the school and draw railroad tracks around our apartment building, pretend I had a train, and I started planning. We have a house in Los Angeles. I started planning to build a railroad around our house, to jackhammer the cement around the house and put in steel rail and have trains that we could actually ride around the house. And it was 2 years of planning. And my wife at one point said, "Don't you think the kids," because we have 2 sons, they're now 11 and 8. But at the time, I think they were 7 and 4. She said, "Don't you think by the time you finish this train, the kids will be sick of trains?" I said, "Well, it's not really for the kids, it's for me." And she was like, "Okay, then we should go ahead and build your train." But no, I love trains. There's something just really romantic and just really primal about just climbing on that engine and being able to take passengers on a ride and hear the clickety clack on the track. So, the train ride around our house is like 45 seconds of pure bliss.
And I'm assuming you've gone many times to the Griffith Park train station.
Oh, sure. And I have a steam engine. We have an electric train at the house, but I have a real coal burning steam engine that I keep out in Riverside. And we've gone out to Train Mountain. I don't know if you know about Train Mountain.
I don't.
It's up in Oregon, and we take our trains up to Train Mountain, and there's like 23 miles of track in the same gauge as our railroad. And I got lost. I took the wrong switch, and I got lost for 3.5 hours on a track out there. It's really great. It's really beautiful.
That's awesome. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
I think the key pieces of advice I would give them is that you should embrace the fact that there will never probably be enough time, money, or resources to do what you actually plan to do.
Amen.
And I am fond of saying, they'll probably put this on my tombstone, that I created an entire career out of making enormous compromise look like an intentional style. And that's exactly right, because I couldn't do what my great idea was. Instead of doing a scaled down half-assed version of that idea, I would throw it away and come up with something radically different, but very bold. Bold to the point that people could not believe that I did not plan to do that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, in regards to perseverance, it's one of the most important things to not give up, but it's also important to have a life.
Balance.
Because especially when you're young, you tend to be all consumed with the industry and making your way in it, which is a natural thing. But if all you do is read a Hollywood Reporter instead of a book, if you don't go to see offbeat cinema and instead I'll just go to see the commercial films that you want to copy from or whatever, you end up endlessly repeating yourself and not breaking new boundaries. And so you have to constantly expose yourself basically to life. You have to go out and have sex with a girl or a guy. You need to go out and do those kinds of things, skydive, scuba dive, whatever it is that you find interesting in life, because you will bring those experiences and those feelings to the films that you make. And those are the main things, I think.
Now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career?
I think probably initially the Film Fantasy Scrapbook by Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah, that's a
Ray
good book.
Harryhausen. It was essentially a photo book with some information that Ray put in there about his stop motion animation and his career. And I got a copy of that book when I was 14 years old, and I just looked at it over and over and over again. And Ray was appearing in Chicago at a record store, and I brought it with me, and I had him sign it. And then years and years and years later, I was president of the ASC, and we invited Ray Harryhausen to come to the ASC clubhouse. And I brought that book with me, and I said, Ray, you signed this for me when I was 14. Would you sign it again now that I'm president of the ASC? And he opened it, he looked at his signature, and he's like, oh my God, you were 14? And he signed the book again for me.
That's amazing.
That was very inspirational.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life? I think, and maybe this applies to life as well as the film business, but there's it's very difficult to get through a film shoot. And you have a lot of personalities on a film shoot, and some of those personalities you don't get along with that well. You know, you butt heads right away, and you know, I used to butt heads with people as well, but then I adopted a point of view that whoever I had the most disagreement with, I was going to actually make my best friend. So I would take that person out to lunch, and I would get together with them, and I say, listen, I don't know what you're going through. I imagine it's a lot, because this is a very difficult production, but I will do anything that I can to help you. You know, and in forging that kind of relationship, I feel like it erases all of those animosities and puts you both on the same plane to try to get the best work done that you can. So I won't go through a production with an antagonistic relationship with anybody. It's completely out of my wheelhouse now. You know, I need to feel like everybody is working toward the same thing. That is amazing advice. That's a really great piece of advice. And of course, now the most difficult question of the day: 3 of your favorite films of all time.
The Graduate.
Okay.
Winged Migration.
Oh wow, that's a great doc.
Because it made me feel like I knew what it was like to fly. You know, it really opened my eyes, and The Graduate was instrumental in my development because I first saw it when I was 8 years old by accident. You know, my parents thought they were taking me to a cartoon festival, but that was only the matinee, and The Graduate was a regular feature. We got too late for the matinee, so we stayed to watch the movie, and I had never seen a movie like that had so much darkness, where the emotions, you didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and it was designed to make you feel, like I said, like Benjamin Braddock, the Dustin Hoffman character. So The Graduate's an amazing movie. And I would say, you know, number 3 probably vacillates a little bit over the years, but, you know, I really, you know, it's probably one of 2 very different movies.
Okay.
You know,
what are they?
You know, the first one would be the Richard Lester's film, the first film with the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, because I felt like it really kind of redefined, you know, the style of the musical movie. When you look at the musical movies during that time, and I'm a huge fan of musicals, there was nothing like A Hard Day's Night at the time that it came out. You know, it was really groundbreaking. And, you know, the other would be probably Sunrise, the 1929 movie, because almost every major technological achievement that we tout today as being an innovation really was in Sunrise in 1929 in some other form, in some primitive form. And, you know, it's greatly influential.
Michael, I want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you're an extremely busy man, so thank you so much for.
There's my family waiting to watch a movie in our theater.
I see that.
After can we watch Family Guy?
We'll see. Anyway, no, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure.
I really, truly want to thank Michael Goi for coming on and dropping major, major knowledge bombs on the tribe today. And I hope you and your family enjoyed your episode of Family Guy that you watched right after our episode. But if you want to get a link to the video podcast on IFH TV, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/299 for the show notes. And if you haven't gone, please go to indiefilmhustle.com/mob to pre-order my new book, Shooting for the Mob, an allegory of how not to follow your filmmaking dream. It's about how I almost made a $20 million movie for the mob and my crazy misadventures through Hollywood and the mafia. If you haven't heard about it already, this is a heck of a story. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/mob to pre-order on Amazon. And that's it, guys, for this episode. I will see you in episode 300. It's insane. We'll talk more about that later. As always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.